Let's talk about the use of psalms through the years in the church. You know that from before the beginning of the Christian church, we have always sung from the book of Psalms. It's sometimes referred to as the Psalter, though that's a sort of modified version of the book of Psalms. Jesus quoted from the book of Psalms more than any other book of the Old Testament. The early church sang the Psalms, and when you look at the word psalms, hymns, and songs, as we have demonstrated, a case could really be made for the fact that all three terms might even refer to the book of Psalms themselves. For certain, the book of Psalms was never intended to just be read, but was always intended to be sung. And the church has always hearkened back to the Old Testament book of Psalms as being the rule by which we measure all other things. In the very early days, of course, the Apostle Paul said to sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. In the early church, they sang all of those. As time went on, there was a reaction against heresy, and we'll see that in later sessions, but that reaction against heresy said, you know what, we should only sing what's safe. So therefore, what's safe is what's already written, what's in the canon itself, and so we sing from the book of Psalms, and the church sort of became limited at a pretty early age. That lasted all the way through the Middle Ages, and I guess you might say until the days of Luther, when he freed us back up again to write hymns that were not just the book of Psalms. Now, most of the hymns that Lutherans sang and that Luther wrote were, in fact, paraphrases of the Scripture itself. But he did add some hymns along the way. And we get to John Calvin, and what we're going to find out is that Calvin, in a strange kind of way, moved us forward with regard to singing the Psalms. And this is where we are really introduced to the word the Psalter. What Calvin did was to say, you know, you can only sing the book of Psalms, but we already have these tunes that sort of fall into long meter or common meter or something. And so let's set the Psalms to rhyme and to meter like this. And so now we can sing the Psalms, but we have to change the word order a bit and make the whole thing fit into a meter. Strangely, though, Calvin had a more conservative view than Luther did as to what the church could sing. He moved us forward, in a sense, by having metricized the hymnal. Calvin's viewpoint lasted all the way until we get to Isaac Watts in the early 1700s, and Watts sort of freed us back up again to be able to sing more than just the Psalms, but to sing hymns of human composure, and he started by doing so with writing 150 Psalms that have been put into the language and stayed to the New Testament, as it were. The Wesleys then, I think, took us back to introduce both hymns and spiritual songs. And eventually, what we came to is to the point of Sankey and Bliss and others who were writing gospel songs that I don't think anybody could mistake them for psalms. And to the more nuanced ear, they're not even hymns, but they have moved completely over to spiritual songs. They called them gospel songs. So from the days of Sankey and Bliss on, and perhaps even now in contemporary music, we don't sing hymns very much, and we don't sing psalms very much, but we do sing spiritual songs. And so in summary, the Christian church began with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, and then the heretics misused human words, and so the church in the Middle Ages used psalms only. Luther added hymns, but Calvin didn't trust anything other than psalms. Eventually Watts and then Wesley and then Sankey and Bliss swung Protestants slowly away from the Psalms only to psalms and hymns, and then to hymns and spiritual songs, and now to spiritual songs only. Recently, there's been a rediscovery of singing the Psalms in worship, but I'm not sure, for the most part, that we are singing all of the Psalms, but rather just a few selected verses. Would you like to cover how to sing the Psalms in worship at your church? I think we really have a challenge in our churches in that the Psalms cover a whole spectrum of emotion and of theology even. There's some rather uncomfortable things like imprecatory psalms and so forth. God, why don't you take vengeance on my enemies, and how I wish that I could destroy them, and so forth. And some of those just don't fit our sort of typical Christian way of thinking about life, and yet there they are. So how would we go about singing an entire psalm, complete with all of the nasty, messy emotions that happen along the way, without it being some inhospitable, laborious work for the sake of a church? That's how we got away from singing the psalms. Well, we could do it by just reading the psalms, and I guess that's one option, but the psalms, as I say, were always meant to be sung, so that's not the greatest of options. Okay, so now we've got a challenge, because any tune that we have has a certain meter to it and a certain rhyme that's implied, and none of those things quite fit. Everything feels kind of awkward. So, well, then we could go back to the early church and sing in chant, like Gregorian chant, and we'd sing the words accurately. The challenge is it wouldn't necessarily sound very accessible to us. So let's talk about that matter of how to chant. Hebrew poetry is set up in couplets most of the time, and the first half of the couplet would always be letter A. The second half of the couplet is either a repeat of the first half, in which case the form of the couplet would be A, such as, "Why are you so downcast, O my soul? Why so disturbed within me?" That's two different ways of saying the same thing. The second form of the couplet would be A, and then the opposite of A. "Save me from all my transgressions. Do not make me the scorn of fools." So do something, don't do something. Or instead of the opposite, I might just move on with another statement that might not be the opposite of that statement, but would just be completing. "My tears have been my food day and night, while men say to me all day long, where is your God?" B is not really related to A at all. It's just like a continuation. In either case, whether it's the opposite of A or it's a continuation, in any case we would call that form A, then B. So the first form would be A with that couplet. The second concept would be A, then B. Now there is a third way of approaching that, which would be that there would be some refrain. There aren't that many psalms that do that, but there are a few, like Psalm 136, where we say, "His mercy endures forever," or "His loving kindness is everlasting," or "His love endures forever," depending on the translation that you're going from, that is always the second half. So in that case, the form is A, B, but the next one goes C, B, D, B, E, B, and so forth, because there's a refrain happening. All right, so Hebrew poetry set up in couplets. Later we'll find some songwriting that harken back to the Hebrew way of writing. It's not written in rhyme. It's not really even written in meter, but it's written with these couplets that might have 10 accented syllables in each line, might have 8, might have 5. But in any case, they're relatively equal lines. Where the poetry comes is in the parallelism of the thoughts.